The most disgraceful image burned into the memory of TikTok was not a single tearful confession or a lonely motel rant. It was the repeated spectacle of a mother of five, Stephanie Jenkins, sitting in front of her phone camera, declaring again and again that her partner Drew was the root of all her pain, the destroyer of her peace, the architect of her exhaustion, while simultaneously choosing, day by day, to stay with him, to film with him, and to fold their children back into the very chaos that was crushing them. A cycle so relentless, so damaging, and so public that it forced the internet to stop and ask, is this motherhood or is this content strategy? The shock was not only in her words, but in the sheer contradiction of the way she paraded her own suffering as if it were a badge of honesty, while doing nothing to change the conditions she admitted were destroying her family. It is this contradiction between self-awareness and refusal to act that has left audiences enraged, bewildered, and compelled to keep watching, as though the unraveling of this family had been transformed into a never-ending reality series. Stephanie Jenkins, known online through her resilient Jenkins presence, first appeared to many as a struggling but relatable mom, navigating the hardships of raising several children in less than ideal circumstances. She presented herself as a woman clawing through survival, a mother who was transparent about the pain of being overwhelmed, and for that honesty, followers initially offered sympathy, support, and validation. To some, she was a voice for single moms, even though she was not technically single. A mirror for women who felt unseen, a reminder that resilience was possible even when life was crashing. But as time passed, the story shifted. What started as relatability turned into exploitation. What started as resilient turned into reckless. And what started as vulnerability turned into manipulation, all under the bright and unforgiving light of TikTok.
Each month we tried to make bills a priority, but then necessities kept falling behind. A lot of things that we needed just weren't being met. And y'all fault us as parents for that. How dare you have more kids when the kids that you have don't have their basic needs met? Sometimes God has plans that don't necessarily make sense in the moment, but I wouldn't change God's plans for nothing. And by that, I mean I wouldn't change having the babies I have. Do I want a way better living environment for my children? Of course I do. But also, Drew and I know what's best for our children, and in the moment, we actually need to catch up on necessities more than we need to change up our living environment. Gasp, how could she even say that? That is the last thing me saying that we don't need to switch up our kids' living environment. We know that's a necessity. However, we also know what's best for our kids isn't just to jump into some kind of apartment or some kind of situation that's not ideal for them. We need an indoor-outdoor kind of living environment. Our babies want to be outside 90% of the time, and Drew and I are right there with them. And as much as people want to scream these assumptions that we don't have our kids' best interests at heart, that's not even true. We honestly haven't even begun to share what we have planned, but we want to, so follow.
She wasn't just sharing her pain. She was commodifying it, curating it, and molding it into something that produced engagement. Each new crisis became a performance, each new rant a chance to pull more sympathy, each new jab at Drew another spark in the cycle of dysfunction that doubled as content. The charges against her, if this were indeed a courtroom: willful exposure of her children's trauma for engagement, manipulation of an online audience through repeated sympathy-bait cycles, normalization of toxic dysfunction through public rants against Drew while refusing to protect her children from the fallout, and the enabling of a man she openly admits is unfaithful, uninvolved, and emotionally destructive. These are not just narrative charges, they are moral ones, because each cycle places her children deeper into a web of neglect, instability, and performance they cannot escape. TikTok's jury, the viewers, have long suspected that Stephanie knows exactly what she is doing. They believe she understands her numbers rise when she cries, when she drags Drew, when she posts reels about survival mode and exhaustion.
You cannot build a platform on rage bait and then expect people to help you on GoFundMe. Not going to happen.
They believe she deliberately weaponizes dysfunction to secure engagement rather than dismantle it for the sake of her kids. And so, the trial begins, not of a woman struggling in silence, but of an influencer who turns the chaos of her family into her primary brand. Exhibit A. What should have been a simple, light-hearted video, a morning routine of preparing her children for school, became yet another weapon in Stephanie's arsenal of public jabs at Drew. She began with a pointed remark. The kids are always at school on time when mom takes them, making clear that when Drew takes them, they are late. This was not a playful aside. It was a public declaration of Drew's incompetence as a father. It was a reminder to her audience that she carries the full burden when he fails, an invitation to sympathize with her plight and scorn his lack of responsibility. The stage setting here matters. She framed the dig as casual, but it is actually an indictment of Drew's absence, irresponsibility, and lack of care. And yet, despite exposing this repeatedly, she remains tethered to him, telling the world he's the red flag, while clutching it even tighter.
Drew Jenkins has left Stephanie Jenkins and they are fighting now. You can tell that they are because she's not being more in your face about it. She's being a little more subtle. But still the hate is there. Latest video of Stephanie Jenkins, she's basically talking about how Drew always takes the kids late to school and that when she's actually doing it, she gets them there on time. And then which is funny, like the kids tell on her without meaning to, because you can see the kids are running to school. I don't care how excited your kids are. Okay, let's play both points. If her kids are so excited to go to school, maybe it's just because the kids want to go somewhere where maybe they are taken care of, they're learning, they're engaged, and they're not all living like, Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. Or they're late. Or they're actually running late and she's trying to make it seem like they're on time.
The critical point. These small digs normalize instability. They teach the children that resentment is casual, that dysfunction is daily, that loyalty shifts depending on who drives the car that morning. And when an unstable life is turned into content, the children are left to carry the real consequences in silence. Every jab Stephanie posts builds an archive of instability that our kids will one day confront. Exhibit B. Stephanie then turned to psychology as her stage. She shared a real quoting. When women face constant stress and uncertainty, their bodies learn to live in survival mode. They stay alert, tense, and exhausted, always waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Her caption? Indeed, but I felt it, recognized what I was experiencing, and I am starting to make change. On the surface, this is reflective. It shows self-awareness. It suggests growth. But the transcript reveals the real issue. She knows she is exhausted, tense, and unsafe in her own relationship, yet she refuses to make the one change that could end the cycle. Instead of removing herself from the source of stress, she documents it, wraps it in captions, and uploads it for strangers to validate. She elevates her stress into a form of presenting it as both confession and inspiration, yet never stepping outside the boundaries of her dysfunctional environment. The analysis here is damning. Survival mode, when turned into content, ceases to be a cry of help and becomes a performance. The audience validates her exhaustion, but her children remain unprotected. This confession is not a step forward, but a continuation of the cycle, a reminder that Stephanie is willing to live in survival mode indefinitely, as long as it brings engagement. And in that performance, she reinforces the lesson that trauma is marketable. The more she posts about it, the more she subtly normalizes it, teaching her viewers that endless stress is something to narrate rather than escape, and teaching her children that their mother's pain is something to be public property, recycled for sympathy rather than resolved for safety.
And that's exactly what Drew and I are going through at this point. I'm not going to leave him, and I don't owe anybody explanations to that. It's between him and I. Y'all are here to watch our journey, not decide our journey. Try to fucking remember that.
Exhibit C. On Facebook, Stephanie vented in a long post. Why can't it be me that gets the extra hour of sleep just one time? Why can't my partner get up with the baby just one time? She painted Drew as absent, careless, a partner who refused to share the burden of parenthood. She added that he offered the excuse. Well, I don't have the milk, so not much I can do. She layered this rant with tons of exhaustion and resentment, suggesting that she had carried the entire load not only for the newborn, but for the other children as well, turning what should have been an intimate complaint into a public narrative for validation. The weight of this exhibit lies in the repetition and the way it has become a recurring script in Stephanie's story. She said the same when their son Boba wasn't, lamenting how Drew failed to show up, and she is saying the same now with their youngest daughter. The story has not changed, only the children have, which means the problem is not new but deeply entrenched. Drew was absent then, and he is absent now. She exposes the pattern clearly to her audience, but she refuses to break it. And worse, she continues to expand her family with him, bringing more children into the very cycle she admits is unbearable, thereby multiplying the harm with each new baby that arrives into the household already drenched in instability. This reveals the contradiction. Stephanie knows Drew does not show up. She knows he's absent. Yet she chooses to build more content, more children, and more excuses on top of his absence. The reflection here is unavoidable. By staying, she has shifted the damage onto her children, ensuring their memories are filled not with stability, but with conflict broadcasted to strangers. The rant is not just about Drew, it is about her choice to normalize dysfunction and pass it off as resilience. By presenting herself as the overworked victim but continuing to perpetuate the cycle, she cements dysfunction as a brand and makes suffering appear inevitable, when in reality, it is a choice she continues to make in public view. Exhibit D. The scandal escalated when Stephanie admitted that Drew had cheated on her. Yet instead of leaving, she framed her decision to stay as a strategy. She even reached out to Drew's alleged side piece to ask for proof, collecting the receipts, then turned back to TikTok with cryptic posts, indirect jabs, and carefully chosen captions that suggested she was simultaneously devastated and calculating. Rather than severing ties with the man who repeatedly humiliated her, she weaponized the betrayal for content, ensuring that even her heartbreak could be recycled into engagement. Her audience was stunned, and many were unsettled. The act of strategizing around betrayal, of choosing to frame infidelity as something to be navigated for the sake of optics, revealed not just delusional, but calculation. She wasn't simply trapped. She was leveraging dysfunction for narrative. By doing so, she transformed a deeply personal violation into a plot twist, dragging her children even deeper into chaos, presenting them with a household where betrayal is not a breaking point, but a storyline, something that can be retold, reshared, and The reflection. Calling it strategy does not make it resilience. It makes it exploitation, a choice to value content above children, chaos above clarity, and engagement above escape. It shows a willingness to mold even the most intimate wounds into public theater, blurring the line between coping and profiteering, and sending a dangerous message that betrayal is tolerable if it generates views. Exhibit E. Stephanie often claims she stays with Drew for the kids, insisting that maintaining a family unit is more important than breaking away. Yet her own posts reveal the opposite. The children are not protected by this choice. They are harmed by it. She has admitted to fighting with Drew in front of them, yelling at them out of misplaced anger and letting them absorb the constant stress of a motel existence. By using the children as justification, she transforms them into shields, objects that absorb the dysfunction, while she insists her choices are noble. In doing so, she teaches them the distorted lesson that stability means tolerating chaos, that keeping a family together is more important than keeping a family safe, and that love is measured by endurance of harm rather than pursuit of peace. This is one of the darkest exhibits. The children are not simply collateral damage, they are props in her narrative of martyrdom. She stays not because it benefits them, but because it gives her a convenient justification to avoid difficult change. And every time she repeats this reasoning, the children are dragged deeper into chaos they cannot escape. The motel walls become their classrooms in dysfunction, the late night arguments their lullabies, and the social media posts their public record of instability. What should have been their shield has become their burden, and what Stephanie frames as sacrifice is in fact complicity in their ongoing harm. Exhibit F: The Victim Narrative. Finally, Stephanie's endless refrains of exhaustion, stress, and lack of support always circle back to one refrain: she is the victim. She tells stories of sleepless nights, absent fathers, motel struggles, and survival mode. Yet every story ends with her, not with the children who are even more vulnerable. She positions herself as the one most, ignoring that the little ones she films are facing trauma that will shape their development permanently. Every time she frames herself as the centerpiece of the tragedy, she erases very real terror of children who are powerless to choose their environment. Children who are developing in a state of constant instability, learning that their cries are less important than their mother's narration of suffering. The analysis is grim. Victimhood has become her brand, and by centering herself, she blinds herself to the very real damage happening to the only people who cannot walk away: her children. She paints herself as the survivor, while they remain the silent casualties, carrying burdens that will outlast her videos and shaping their sense of self in ways that may haunt them long after the cameras are turned off. The fallout is already happening in real time, like a sentence being read out loud before the final gavel. The children are learning that their home is a battlefield and their mother's camera is always on. They are learning that dysfunction is normal, that chaos is daily, that love is conditional on engagement. Stephanie's audience, once sympathetic, is turning from compassion to criticism, questioning whether her endless cycles are genuine or staged for views. Monetization thrives on dysfunction, but so does backlash, and each post chips away at the little credibility she has left. The children lose stability, Drew loses reputation, and Stephanie loses respect, but she gains clicks. The short-term reward is engagement. The long-term cost is the psychological well-being of her children, the erosion of her credibility, and the dismantling of her image. This is the sentencing unfolding in public view. An influencer slowly losing the trust of her audience while her children quietly pay the price. Judge's analysis. This case is bigger than Stephanie. It is about the influencer culture that rewards trauma when packaged neatly into digestible reels. It is about mothers who turn motel struggles into series, about fathers who dodge accountability behind gaming consoles, and about audiences who, by watching, enable dysfunction to become economy. The critique is cultural. When pain becomes profitable, people will cling to it. When dysfunction gains views, parents will normalize it. And when children are included, their innocence becomes the currency of engagement. This is the darker side of TikTok parenting, the transformation of private suffering into public entertainment. Children are not supposed to be supporting actors in their parents' engagement strategies. They are not supposed to grow up learning that fights are filmed, that tears are monetized, and that trauma is recycled endlessly for strangers' validation. This is not resilience. It is recklessness disguised as relatability. And yet, the algorithm rewards it, ensuring that cycles like Stephanie's will not only continue, but multiply. The reflection is damning. If Stephanie represents the resilient mom, then TikTok has wrapped resilience into a performance, teaching parents to cry for strangers before they comfort their own children, teaching dysfunction as strategy, and teaching exploitation as normal. The verdict. The verdict based on the exhibits is harsh but clear. Stephanie Jenkins is guilty of exploiting dysfunction for engagement, guilty of ignoring red flags for clout, guilty of placing her partner above her children's safety, and guilty of transforming trauma into content currency. She has taken the pain of her children and repackaged it as entertainment. And in doing so, she has blurred the line between honesty and exploitation beyond recognition. But in this court of TikTok, the judge cannot sentence alone. The jury, that is you, must decide. Do you see a mother caught in delusion, unable to leave, or a strategist deliberately fueling chaos for clicks? Do you see resilience, or do you see recklessness? Do you see a woman who cannot escape, or a woman who will not escape because staying feeds the numbers? Drop your verdict in the comments, because in this case, like all cases of influencer culture, will only end when the audience decides what behavior will no longer be rewarded. Until then, Stephanie's cycle will continue. Her children will remain in the crossfire, and her brand will thrive on dysfunction. The jury must decide, what is the true cost of turning trauma into content?